I got rid of 10 years of inflammation, a massive swollen belly, and lost 20 pounds in the process following an anti-inflammatory way of living. I used to struggle with extreme endometriosis symptoms. My hormones were all over the place. I literally used to blow up like a balloon. People used to ask me if I was pregnant all the time. And it felt like no matter what I was eating, whether it was healthy or processed, I just felt like everything was blowing me up. And that was until I found two diets. The first diet, the Autoimmune Protocol, or you might have heard it called the AIP online, and then followed an anti-inflammatory diet. Now, they are two very different things. Not everyone needs to do them both. I had to, and I'll explain why in this video. But I promise you I'm going to cover them both in detail so that you know which one is for you, whether you need to do one or both, because it absolutely changed my life. And had I had this video 10 years ago, I would have avoided all of that pain. So I'm hoping it can help you too. But let's get into the video. If you don't know me or you're new here, my name is Sophie Richards, and I am someone who has always struggled with something called endometriosis. I always had unbalanced hormones. My belly always used to be swollen, and I had no idea why my weight would fluctuate so much. One minute I was a size 8, the next minute I was a size 14, and I was just like, how am I meant to dress for these two different wardrobes? And it wasn't just the inconvenience of what the hell am I going to wear, but it was also like my body image and self-perception, because how are you meant to live a confident, happy life when you are constantly seeing a different version of yourself in the mirror? And I was just getting so frustrated with it. And that was only one part of the puzzle. The other part was the heavy, constant, excruciating periods that I was getting with endometriosis. I was tired all the time. I was anemic all the time because of how heavy my periods were. So I just spent most of my life in pain, struggling, and I even almost dropped out of university, and I was like, I've had enough. So after finishing university, for a brief period of time, I did go into the corporate world. I was an account manager for two of the world's biggest companies, which is pretty insane to look back at. I was loving the corporate queen life until, again, my health would always interrupt situations. I was always having surgeries. I was always in pain. I even ended up getting my eggs frozen. I've made an entire YouTube video about that if you're curious about the process. But ultimately, I was like, I need to get to the bottom of my inflammation. So I quit my job, trained to become a women's health practitioner, which I am now certified in, with a specialty in menstrual health, which I'm so excited about. But my true passion is anti-inflammatory living, because it has changed my life. I've lost almost 20 pounds. I've got rid of almost all of my symptoms other than skin, which I'll come on to in this video. And now I have dedicated my life to helping other people like you get through the same thing, because I know how hard it is when you are fighting through it on your own and you don't need to. I am here to help you. There's a huge community online that can help you. I'll pop my socials on the screen here so you can check those out there. I post every single day. But the main thing that started my anti-inflammatory journey, and where, to be honest with you, I got most of my results, was when I changed my way of eating. The reason that you are here is to hear about the two anti-inflammatory diets that changed my life. Now, I want to caveat this with, I have tried every single diet under the sun, not just these two. Keto, fasting, prolonged fasting, vegetarianism, carnivore, you name it, I have tried it. But it wasn't until I found the Autoimmune Protocol and an anti-inflammatory diet that my life actually started to change in a meaningful way. Now, there are other pillars of inflammation, which I'm going to talk about in this video, but for a lot of us, food is the biggest problem. And that is why I'm going to focus on these two diets today. Before we get into it, a quick little disclaimer. I am a certified women's health practitioner, but I'm not a medical doctor, and I'm also not your practitioner. So please make sure that you read the disclaimer on the screen right now, and make sure that you make careful decisions when it comes to your health and well-being. Okay, so first of all, what is the difference between the AIP and an anti-inflammatory diet? Now, the AIP, I always say, is a protocol. It's called the Autoimmune Protocol, and it is very similar in nature to something called the low FODMAP and the low histamine protocol. Now, these are short-term structured ways of eating to help you find intolerances or trigger foods. So all of those diets, so the low FODMAP, histamine, and the Autoimmune Protocol, the AIP, all basically make you go through a period of time where you remove things out of your diet, you then reintroduce them, and depending on whether you flare up to those ingredients, basically helps you identify what your trigger foods are. Now, the low FODMAP for me didn't do much. I basically found out that things like cauliflower, broccoli, onions, and garlic tend to make me a bit gassy, but they didn't actually help reduce my symptoms or have any impact on my weight, my endometriosis, or my overall inflammation. Long story short, they are all short-term protocols which help you identify triggers, and then you can move on with your life afterwards. Versus the anti-inflammatory diet. Now, that is a way of eating that I genuinely believe everyone should be doing. There is no restriction, there's no elimination. It's something that you can start today if you really want to, and it's more about focusing on a whole food, nutritious way of eating. So it's not about removing any ingredients. Yes, typically you would look at limiting or avoiding ultra-processed foods, because again, you're focusing on whole foods. Think one ingredient: meat, fish, fruit, fruit, veg, nuts, seeds, grains, legumes, versus ultra-processed foods that, if you just think about things that are just super packaged and super processed and have lots of ingredients that we don't understand, that tends to be the ultra-processed stuff. Now, the anti-inflammatory diet is an incredible way of living, and I really think everyone should start there. But for a lot of people, myself included, you might not see the results that you actually want to begin with, and you might need to start with a more targeted protocol like the low FODMAP, like the histamine, or the AIP. Now, I can make a separate video on all three of those, but for me, in my opinion, the AIP is the most robust, and that is the one that absolutely changed my life. So let's get into the AIP. Like I said, the AIP stands for Autoimmune Protocol, and it was actually made to help people with autoimmune conditions or conditions that are similar, or people with inflammatory conditions. Like I said, I've got endometriosis, but other people who struggle with things like PCOS, IBS, IBD, Crohn's even, all of these people tend to struggle with things like inflammation. And so going on something like the Autoimmune Protocol, which is basically targeted to help reduce inflammation and allow your gut to finally heal, can find lots of benefits with it. This is a very extreme diet, okay? This is not something that I recommend you do on your own. I have a step-by-step guide that I have made based on my experience, because when you Google the AIP, there are tons of different versions, and I found it really overwhelming when I was trying to do it, that there wasn't one specific way of doing it. So I have my own, which is based on all of those resources, plus speaking to experts, and now have one particular guide for it. I will talk to you about that in a second. But when it comes to doing this, I would highly recommend that you check with your doctor, a medical practitioner, or a women's health practitioner to guide you through the process. Anyway, the AIP is a 3-phase protocol. So the first phase is elimination, the second is reintroduction, and the third is maintenance. When it comes to the elimination process, this basically is where you eliminate all of these things from your diet. I'll put a list on the screen here of the main things that you would remove, but it is such a detailed list that you might as well just look at the AIP guide to get the full list. But we're talking things like gluten, dairy, wheat, nuts, seeds, grains, legumes, and even nightshades, which are types of fruits and vegetables. It's probably easier to tell you what you can have in the elimination phase. And that is basically meat, fish, fruit, and veg. And within fruit and veg, you can't have nightshades. So there's no coffee, there's no matcha, there's none of that stuff, okay? So it's very extreme, absolutely no ultra-processed foods. And there's also no cheat days or anything like that. This is not a calorie diet, you are not reducing calories. But one thing, and I'll come on to the pros and cons in a second, is that weight loss is very common in extreme time frames. Because it is such a restricted diet, even when you are eating all of these calories, one, when your body is processing real whole food, you tend to process it better, but also naturally you're reducing your calorie intake for some people because you're snacking less here and there, because you literally can't really snack on this protocol unless you are making your homemade ones, which again you can see in the recipe e-guide that I have. But anyway, once you reduce all of those things or eliminate these things out of your diet, you do it for at least 30 days, no more than 90 days, and you basically do that to see until your symptoms go away. For example, the reason we say minimum 30 days is that it's probably going to take you at least 30 days to stop having these symptoms. However, if your symptoms have not gone after 90 days, then that is a really good indication that food is not the trigger of your symptoms. And I want to say that because so many people get caught up in staying in this elimination phase of the AIP, hoping that their symptoms don't go away, keep pushing past that 90-day process and going, why aren't my symptoms going away? And it might be that food is not the trigger of your symptoms. So it's really important that you do it for at least 30 days to give yourself a chance to see those results, no more than 90. When I did the AIP, I did it for 30 days in terms of that elimination process, because the main things that I was looking to help were my inflammation, my bloating, and my endometriosis symptoms. I was hopeful that it would help my skin, and it didn't. That might be because I didn't do it for long enough, but it also, and I believe, is not down to food, because I typically respond to stress more than food when it comes to skin flare-ups, whereas my inflammation in terms of my weight gain, my bloating, and my endometriosis pain used to come after eating certain foods. I just didn't know what they were. I could not believe, after 30 days of doing the elimination phase of the AIP, almost all my symptoms went. So I mentioned my skin didn't improve. However, my bloating, my inflammation, my endometriosis pain, and my period pain completely went, and my periods got so much lighter as well, which I had no idea would happen. So after that first elimination phase, you go through a very tedious second phase, which is the reintroduction. This is where one by one, you reintroduce each ingredient at a time. It takes a lot of time. The AIP is something that will take over your life. It's why you have to be really sure you want to do it before starting it, because it is very much an all-in thing, and it's why it's not for everyone. I'll talk about who it's for and who it's not in a second, but it's why I would highly recommend that you do it with a medical professional to make sure that you're in a safe and structured environment doing it. When it comes to the order of reintroduction, there is a specific way of doing it, which is more beneficial for inflammation, and that is detailed in the guide as well. But for me, I personally chose to reintroduce the things that I missed the most, things like coffee, black pepper. I don't particularly like black pepper that much, but it's just in everything, and I wanted a bit more freedom with food and being able to go out and about and eat, and black pepper is in literally everything. You reintroduce the foods one by one every 3 to 5 days. Wait until you see a reaction, and if you don't, you can move on to the next reintroduction until you find your trigger foods. Now, I had no idea that my trigger food was going to be chili flakes. I don't even like spice. I don't even add chili or chili flakes to any of my meals. Neither does my partner. However, every single weekend I would go out for brunch and I would have eggs, toast, avocado on some sourdough, and I used to flare up every single time, and my flare-ups could last almost a week. So basically every single week I was having this brunch and I was flaring up, and I was like, I don't understand why. Always thought it was the bread. Then I thought maybe it's the eggs. Then I thought maybe it's the avocado. It turns out that when I reintroduced a tiny amount of chili flakes in the reintroduction process, I had a massive flare-up. I called the restaurant and I was like, is there any chili in that meal? And they were like, oh yeah, we put chili on and chili flakes on top of the eggs. So sometimes the thing that can be triggering you can be something healthy, something unprocessed like chili, which is why the AIP is so powerful. It's not about the classic gluten and dairy that people look at. It's not just about ultra processed foods. It's about the individual ingredients that might be healthy for everyone else, but might be problematic for you at this point in your life. So for me, I found out that there were a couple of things that I was really intolerant to that would trigger my inflammation. Chili being one of them, chickpeas being another. Gluten and dairy I can tolerate in small amounts, but as soon as I put them in frequently into my diet, I tend to puff up, which is why basically now I live 90-10 or even 95-5. 90 to 95% of the time I eat whole unprocessed foods, and then the 5 to 10% of the time I am more flexible. I love an almond croissant. I will never get rid of it out of my life, but am I having it every day? No, I probably have one every other week. I do have processed stuff here and there. Sometimes sauces are really difficult to get unprocessed, but you hear what I'm trying to say. Now, after doing the AIP, I've learned my lessons from that reintroduction, which then pulls you into the third phase of the AIP, which is maintenance. This is where you live your life after with all of those foods back into your diet. It's really important that you reintroduce them all, because there's tons of things that you're eliminating in the AIP that are really healthy, especially fibrous things like nuts, seeds, grains, legumes. It's really important to reintroduce those. And then when you find your trigger foods, if food is your trigger, to just be mindful of those. And the maintenance phase of the AIP really is about finding a way of living that you're happy with. Because like I said, ultra processed foods don't agree with me, but you know what? Sometimes the croissant with the girls is really worth a bit of puffiness. For me, it was the chili and the chickpeas that were my main flare foods. When I reintroduce them back in, I get these huge painful belly flare-ups, and I also have a really painful period after eating them. So that is the AIP in a nutshell. Now let's go through the pros and cons. The pros of the AIP is that it can lead to rapid symptom relief. Now this isn't the case for everyone. For me, it absolutely was. I did not think this diet was going to work, by the way, because I tried so many other diets. I was like, why would this be any different? And I was so wrong about the AIP. So that's something I would tell everyone, that if you were going to start it, put your misconceptions aside, because honestly, you might learn something new on there, but it can lead to rapid symptom relief. Like I said, 10 years of inflammation, painful endometriosis symptoms, 4 surgeries, and nothing did as much as the AIP did. The second, and that's an obvious one, you can identify specific trigger foods. Like I would never have known that chili was an issue unless I'd eliminated it, got rid of my symptoms, and then reintroduced it. And finally, for a lot of people, myself included, it can really help reset your digestive system and your energy levels. I have never had so much energy since doing the AIP. The cons are it can feel very restrictive and it pretty much takes over your life. There is no cheat days, there's no a little bit of this, a little bit of that. You have to go all in with it. And that brings me on to the people who this diet is for and not. For anyone who is an athlete, you might find it very difficult to keep your calories up. You might find that your energy is low at the start, and you also might find that your performance is lower and that you also lose too much weight. Weight loss was something that I was looking for on the AIP, and I was grateful that it came with it. I lost, like I said, a lot of weight on the AIP. But if you are someone who doesn't want to lose weight, then the AIP probably isn't something that you want to start, because just naturally the way you are eating and eliminating processed foods, you are probably going to drop a lot of weight. My partner tried the AIP, Dylan, he's a rugby player. He lost 7 kilos in 2 weeks and had to stop because his job literally can't have him be that low. Secondly, very obviously, people who unfortunately have a history of eating disorders shouldn't attempt this diet. Just the nature of eliminating restriction and the focus around food and reading labels, I think, can be a mindset that is very dangerous to go into if you have a history of eating disorders. And finally, vegetarians and vegans. I'm so sorry, I promise you this is nothing against you personally. It is just the fact that your protein sources, like your nuts, seeds, grains, and legumes, are eliminated in the phase 1. And to look at inflammation, you also want to make sure that you're fueling yourself with enough protein. And I absolutely think you can do that in a vegetarian or a vegan diet, but on the AIP, you unfortunately can't do that. So unless you're willing to do something like a pescatarian diet, or temporarily you're happy to eat meat, unfortunately this is not for you. So that is the AIP in a nutshell. It is an elimination inflammation reintroduction diet. It can help you find your trigger foods. It was the best thing I ever did. But like I said, it can be really confusing to follow a guide online because everyone says different things. So if you want the specific protocol that I did, I not only have an AIP guide with a step-by-step breakdown of how to do it and how I did it, as well as a 2-week meal plan and 6 of my favorite recipes to get you going. I'll pop that on the screen here, and a link to all of this, anything that I mentioned in this video, the links will be in the description. I also made, because a lot of you guys asked for it, I think almost 20,000 people have ended up doing my AIP guide, which is just a crazy amount of people. But everyone was like, please, can you make a recipe ebook to go with it? Because that phase 1 can be difficult to navigate sometimes. So me and my partner, he is like the chef in our house. He is amazing. We ended up working together and making a recipe ebook. So you can get my guide, you can get my recipe ebook, or if you want to get them both, I've made them cheaper as a bundle. So I'll pop the links all down in the description there. But that is the AIP. It changed my life. But the problem with the AIP is, what do you do after? Do you just end up eating exactly how you were before, minus those intolerances, or do you actually want to carry on into an anti-inflammatory way of eating? Which brings me on to the anti-inflammatory diet. Like I said at the start, the anti-inflammatory diet focuses on whole food. So what I mean by that is just one ingredient: meat, fish, fruit, veg, nuts, seeds, grains, and legumes. And you look to limit ultra-processed refined sugars, sweeteners, that kind of stuff. So we're talking about eating more things like fruits, veggies, meats, all those stuff that I've listed, and then limiting the amount of things like breads, pastas, cereals, wine, sugar, coffee, cakes, all of that good stuff that we love eating and that we definitely eat too much of in our society. The anti-inflammatory diet isn't about eliminating or reducing any specific ingredients. A lot of people think on an anti-inflammatory diet, you have to get rid of gluten and dairy. That is not the case. For a lot of people, gluten and dairy is absolutely fine for them. For a lot of people that struggle with inflammation, they can be problematic, and that is why sometimes eliminating them is great. But on the anti-inflammatory diet, that is absolutely not necessary. It's about focusing on one ingredient foods as much as possible and reducing the ultra-processed. It's a much more sustainable way of eating. It's not restrictive. It's something that is very easily adapted into family life, and also focuses on things that are really important that the AIP doesn't. Like I said, the AIP is more about finding your trigger foods, whereas the anti-inflammatory diet is more about how to make you feel your best self. So we focus on things like proteins, fats, carbohydrates, and fiber. So important. And those are things that the AIP don't really cover. So that is why I love the anti-inflammatory diet. And also there's a focus on things like omega-3 fatty acids. So we actually need omega-3 and omega-6 in our diet. Omega-3 is anti-inflammatory and omega-6 is inflammatory. You need to have a nice balance of that. When we eat things that are whole food and nutritious, so things like you would have on an anti-inflammatory diet, for example, you naturally have a nice ratio of omega-3, which is anti-inflammatory, versus most ultra-processed foods are naturally leaning towards the omega-6, which is inflammatory. It's why so many people are struggling with inflammation when they eat ultra-processed foods. It's not just because your body is like, what the hell are you putting in me? What are tons of these ingredients and chemicals that I don't recognize? But it's also because that ratio is flipped to be inflammatory rather than anti-inflammatory. So the pros of an anti-inflammatory diet is, like I said, it's pretty easy and sustainable to follow, very enjoyable, tons of food that you can eat, which are really tasty. I actually think there is a way of doing the AIP that's in a tasty way. It just might be different to how you normally eat now. It's also very supportive of gut health because you're not eliminating things like fiber. So that is really important that it's in there. We need to have fiber to help us with our hormones, our digestion, everything. And there's plenty of good sources of fiber in an anti-inflammatory diet. And finally, like I said, it's really easy to adapt to family life. So whether you're single, with a partner, with a family, with tons of kids, it is definitely something that you and your whole family can do. But there are some cons with it. It's less structured and you're not going to be able to find your individual trigger foods, or at least not very easily, because it's not a cardboard cutout. You've removed this, you've reintroduced it, and now you're flaring. It would be less easy to find out what your trigger foods are. For example, for me, I had a very healthy diet before anyway. Chili is very healthy, it's unprocessed, it's part of an anti-inflammatory diet. For example, it's one ingredient, tons of antioxidants, it's amazing for you. But for me and my body, it just doesn't agree with me. And so I would never have found out that chili was a problem for me had I not have done the AIP first. And this, I hope, brings you to that mindset of why some people need to do the AIP first and then the anti-inflammatory diet. Some people who aren't intolerant to specific foods might just want to do the anti-inflammatory diet. I'll come on to how to decide which person you are in a second. But the other con, and I put con in quotations because I don't really think it's a con, is that you might find that the results take a little bit longer. We are all looking for long-term sustainable results. We are not looking for quick wins here. So that is not a con in my eyes. But for some people who want to drop the weight, drop inflammation straight away, the AIP is probably going to be quicker than the anti-inflammatory diet. So when it comes to asking yourself, do I need to do the AIP or do I need to do the anti-inflammatory diet or do I need to do both? I would think about whether or not you are flared up by healthy meals with an extreme inflammatory reaction and if you've tried absolutely everything. That is what I got to with the AIP. I was like, I've tried everything. I've tried all the diets. I've tried unprocessed foods. I'd basically tried the anti-inflammatory diet before doing the AIP and I was like, I'm still flaring and there is nothing else I can do. Or that's what I thought until I did the AIP. And then after the AIP, I transitioned to the anti-inflammatory diet, which is something that I've maintained and sustained today. So I've done the AIP, a year and a half ago, and I've maintained all of my results, if not got better results, because again, I combined it with the anti-inflammatory diet. Versus people who are just like generally struggling with inflammation and are a bit puffy. You might be the kind of person who doesn't like flare up after a meal. You're just like, ugh, I just feel sluggish. I feel fatigued. My mood is down. I feel puffy. My weight is a little bit up and down. Maybe it's actually better to start with the anti-inflammatory diet. Now, I know that you can say, do you know what? I'm going to go all in and do the AIP. I totally get if you want to do that. It's up to you. Again, I would recommend doing it with a medical professional. I personally, if I was working with you, I would say start with the anti-inflammatory diet. And if, only then if you are still flaring from different ingredients and you feel a bit lost, try a protocol like the AIP. Because why go extreme if you can just start with the anti-inflammatory diet and you might just need that. You might get all the results that you want and more with that and avoid doing something as restrictive as the AIP. For me, and I know a lot of other people, unfortunately, we do need to do something like the AIP or a histamine or a low FODMAP protocol before doing the diet, just to find out what your trigger foods are. Now, the problem with an anti-inflammatory diet and a protocol like the AIP, the histamine, keto, all of that stuff, is that they are food focused only. What about the other pillars of inflammation? Through my women's health practitioner course, my own research and studying, I have found 6 pillars of inflammation. I have not invented these 6 pillars. If you look at research, different experts pull at these pillars, but essentially they are food, gut, detoxification, sleep, stress, and movement. If any one of these pillars are down, if your sleep is bad, your movement is bad, your stress is bad, your gut is bad, you're not detoxing properly, all of those things can cause inflammation, not just what you eat. And that, my friends, is why my skin is such an issue. I have quite a stressful job and sometimes it means I travel a lot and I go all over the country with it, which I absolutely love and I wouldn't change a thing, but it causes me a lot of stress. Sometimes it knocks into my sleep if I'm in different time zones, and that's when I have a skin flare up. Please be mindful when you are doing these anti-inflammatory diets or protocols that you need to be mindful of those other pillars as well, because you might find yourself in a situation where you are eliminating all of these foods, you're reintroducing them, and you still feel lost because you are not focusing on those other pillars. I always say there is no point focusing all of your energy on what you are eating if you are not sleeping, you are not moving, you are stressed, all of that stuff. So please be mindful of that. Something I have brought out, I'm so excited and can't wait to actually be able to bring out. It comes out on the 1st of January. So if you're watching this before then, you can pre-order it. If you're watching this after the 1st of January, then you can absolutely order it now and get it delivered to your home. It's my anti-inflammatory reset book. This is the book, and the reason it is so chunky is because it's actually half inflammation. So I go through the 6 pillars of inflammation and exactly how to do an anti-inflammatory diet in here. But the other half of it is anti-inflammatory recipes. So we've got breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, things for your pantries, breads, desserts. Oh my God, the sticky toffee and the macadamia cookies are my absolute favorite. And by the way, if you're not subscribing to my channel, now is the best time because I'm going to be posting some of these recipes and demoing them live for you. So make sure you subscribe if you want to see that. But ultimately, if you are looking for a guided reset that is not as extreme as the Autoimmune Protocol and you want a general anti-inflammatory way of living, then this is going to be your absolute Bible. Like I said, I will pop the link to this down in the description. And finally, if you actually want to start your anti-inflammatory journey right now and see genuine results, remember that you are not lazy and that you don't have a lack of willpower. Most of the time it's because you don't have the right support, guidance, or accountability, and just no one to check in on you. So please join the Found Collective. I'll pop a link again in the description to that. It's basically a massive community of incredible, like-minded women like me and you who actually want to not only start our journeys, but support other people on it too, and just do it together so you don't feel like you're on your own. Every single Monday, I do a check-in with you to see how you're going. Are you achieving your goals? Do you need any more support? On the last day of each month, we do a reflect and set goal session to make sure that we have a look at the month. Why have we achieved our goals? Why haven't we achieved our goals? We celebrate each other and then we set new goals for the rest of the month. And like I said, we check in every single Monday. We also have some juicy expert calls in there. We're going to have an expert come in and talk about the AIP. So please check out the Found Collective and I will see you there. I can't wait to see you next week in my next YouTube video. And for now, thank you so much for watching and I hope this was really helpful. I'm so excited for you to start your anti-inflammatory journey. And if you have any questions at all, comment on this video or send me a DM on Instagram and TikTok and I will see you over there. Have the best day and see you in my next video. Bye.